Let's bring in George Tsilis, senior markets correspondent. George, we're talking Taiwan Semi, hit all-time highs last Friday, pulling back a little bit. But at the same time, George, I was looking at some data. They control about 60% of the $600 billion semiconductor market as far as foundry services. So they're building the chips here, George. This is one of those companies that the other chip makers can't do without, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is really the core. I mean, you have to obviously, look at design of technologies. NVIDIA obviously is a fantastic designer of technologies. So is AMD and Intel. But then you have to think about foundries and manufacturing, and that's what Taiwan Semiconductor does. It's pretty remarkable, as you mentioned, 60% global market share for manufacturing. It's incredible. The other larger competitors out there include Samsung in Korea. So this is not only a strategically important company from a private sector standpoint in manufacturing, but I think for the world, it's a strategically important company, especially in Taiwan, where we know there's always been this sort of geopolitical risk and tension associated with the U.S. and China. And not to mention, there's a lot of funding going towards Taiwan Semiconductor from the United States to re-onshore manufacturing here in the United States. If you look at the next potential $5 billion federal grant that is providing Taiwan Semiconductor's funding for a plant in Arizona, that's to be expected. Intel recently got a grant. So my point is you can actually see policy moving in the direction to help shore up semiconductor production here in the United States. Much like, if you look at the last, 10 to 15 years, look at policy for oil production. We're the largest producer of oil now in the world. So I think this is something that's important here for this company. I think the other thing is it's not too extended. If you look at it, it really just recently broke above a 3-year high. I'm going to put AMD in that same camp with stocks that, again, have made huge moves but aren't extremely extended, like NVIDIA and maybe super microcomputers, which we talked about, I think, a couple times on this program. But nonetheless, one of the things I noticed about Taiwan Semiconductor is if you look at last year, sales in total for the last 4 quarters were down about 4.5% to 70 billion versus 74.5 billion the previous year. And earnings growth was actually down about 7%, but everything forward looks rather positive for the name, with 11% earnings growth alongside about 12% revenue growth. So I think this is a situation where Taiwan Semi got caught up in this inventory glut, and that includes things like mobile chips, DRAM chips, and so forth. But now, everything looks pretty rosy from a forward standpoint, especially with the resumption of profit growth for this company, which again is strategically important for the world, but also is a very profitable company. And with that said, Bernstein today increased their price target to 150 from 125 and maintains an outperform rating.
Yeah, and George, they've got NVIDIA as their customer. They've got Qualcomm. They've got Apple. Apple's trying to take some chip building in-house. But in simplest terms, chip foundries are expensive and they're hard to build. And that's part of the problem, right,
Yes.
George? So in the near term, Taiwan Semi seems to be the go-to, especially now with this explosion of AI, that, hey, they're going to be confined for a few years at least because Intel's and Taiwan Semi's new plant in Arizona that they're trying to get built, those are a couple years off from actually producing chips, right?
Yes. Sure, absolutely. And look, you have to think about the expensive nature of building manufacturing chips. It's very expensive, but Taiwan is a remarkably profitable company. Their net profit margins are like 39%, which speaks to the demands that the world has on this company. So the thing about it is they're exposed across all facets of semiconductors. Apple, CPUs. It's not just NVIDIA's GPUs. In fact, if you think about NVIDIA, they generate around $60 billion in sales. Apple generates about $360 billion in sales, about 6 times the revenue. So Apple is a strategically important company. We know that they face some challenges in sales, and I think that's one of the reasons why Taiwan Semiconductor hasn't been formed on a sales basis, but everything is looking forward, coming up in the next year or two from a cyclical semiconductor standpoint, and that includes the GPU technologies that they produce for NVIDIA.
Yep, this is definitely one to watch. It's pulled back since hitting those all-time highs just last Friday, down again today, about 3.5%, even with that price target hike out of Bernstein that you mentioned. All right, great stuff. Thanks to George Tsilis, Senior Markets Correspondent here, breaking down TSM.